I'm Elaine Monsen, and a professor emeritus at the University of Washington in the School of Public Health and Community Medicine, and an adjunct emeritus professor in the School of Medicine. I came to the University of Washington many, many years ago, 1963, and at that time, nutrition was on campus in a different department in the College of Arts and Sciences. And when I came, my husband had accepted a position here in the School of Business, and so I was given an acting assistant professorship because of nepotism rules. But in about 3 or 4 years, the acting position was removed, and another couple of years they said, I think you should go up for promotion to associate professorship, which I did, a few years subsequently to professor. So the nepotism rule kind of evaporated without my fighting it per se, but being very active on campus, and the people I met, the various faculty members through many different departments, were very helpful in this. One thing I think that was useful for the university and certainly for the field of nutrition was that I established a nutrition studies committee through the graduate school, through which we identified various people across the campus who were interested in nutrition, and we could sponsor seminars. Usually I would find somebody passing through Seattle as they went from one university to another, and the graduate school would give us something like $100, and that would be enough that they would get off the plane, and we'd whisk them to the campus, and they'd give us a seminar from the Nutrition Studies Committee, and then they could take their $100 and maybe go up to the Space Needle for a dinner or whatever they chose to do. But it was a wonderful way to get medicine, public health, kinesiology, anthropology, psychology, all the various disciplines that related to nutrition together to hear these excellent speakers. One of the first people we had was somebody in aging, and that was again a new area for our field, and one that has continued to be important. More and more so, I'm beginning to find. So the Nutrition Studies Committee was very valuable, and I think it helped maintain the discipline of nutrition on this University of Washington campus.
I wonder whether you might talk about, you alluded to Nutritional Sciences being in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Yes.
Could you talk about its subsequent migration to the School of Medicine and the School of Public Health?
Well, obviously nutrition fits many, many areas, and it was suitable in the arts and sciences area, but eventually when there were concerns about cost, that did not seem to be as feasible, and the scientific components of the nutrition area seemed stronger, and so we were asked then to move to different departments across the campus. And again, the Nutrition Studies Committee was very valuable that way because many people were identified with their interest in nutrition. And at that point, most of us went into the School of Public Health, Community Medicine, where Gil Ullman was the chair or this head of the school, and subsequently Pat Wall took that position as head of the school. In the meantime, I had been elected to the College Council for the Arts and Sciences and served there for several years, and I think that may have been beneficial too. And also had an adjunct appointment in the School of Medicine. And that was actually through hematology. Several years ago, the Recommended Dietary Allowance Committee, the people who set the guidelines for food consumption, raised the recommendation for iron to be quite high. And I wrote a letter to the head of that committee and asked him, was the committee suggesting supplementation, because it wasn't feasible really to get that level of iron in the diet. And he wrote back to me and said, oh, you're wrong. Just look at the food composition tables. There's plenty of iron in foods. So a group of students and I prepared some menus and showed him that unless you ate a lot of molasses or a lot of things like this, which were not the common foods consumed, you couldn't reach that level of iron. So he wrote back and said, since I'd responded once, his second response to me was, well, if you're so interested in iron, why don't you call the head of hematology, Dr. Clement Finch? He is Mr. Iron of the world. So I thought, well, I must do that. And 2 days later, I had a memo on my desk that Clem Finch had called me. And so I called Clem, and we began collaborating and had a wonderful collaboration for 25 years. I went into it trying to convince him that the recommendation should be a little lower, and he went into it trying to convince me it should be higher. We both kind of modulated toward the center. But that was very exciting to be involved, and we did quite a bit of work. One thing that people often are aware of is that ascorbic acid enhances iron absorption, and that orange juice with a piece of toast will increase the absorption of that iron in the toast. And that was research we did here at the University of Washington, that Clem and I did.
That might be a good jumping off spot to ask you about some of the significant research you did perform here.
Well, that's certainly, the iron work was really one of the main ones. And then we also did quite a bit on even the iron that was used in food supplements, the way cereals are fortified, and tested those on experimental animals to see what was really beneficial. And that was reported at various international and national meetings. One thing I was very pleased, we started a program for master's students that included research, and I always encouraged them to go on to present these at national meetings if they could. And then subsequently we got a doctoral program in nutritional sciences, and there again I encouraged my doctoral students to report their findings at national or international meetings, which they did. And exciting to go to Barcelona when one of my students reported, and another time to go to Sweden where another one reported. So there's advantages to having qualified graduate students, having them perform well.
Wonder whether you might talk a little bit about how your own discipline, how dietetic sciences, nutritional sciences have changed from when you came to the university in 1963 through the subsequent decades. What changes do you think you've seen both in the substance of the subject and in the demography of its practitioners, for instance?
Well, I think the Nutrition Studies Committee really parallels that, in that the breadth of that, and that's, nutrition has such breadth. In fact, that can be a limitation. It can have such breadth that people don't know quite where it is. And so we have to be sure that we keep our focus and have an entity as well as a good collaboration around. That's done well. Many of the people who come into this field come through psychology or come through biochemistry, come through different ways that, because everyone enjoys eating and has to make food selection, or at least consumption selections, and so it is very diverse. I did quite a few things with national organizations, such as the Institute of American Institute of Nutrition, the American Society of Clinical Nutrition, and in those societies I was elected to one of the national chairs to be on their board, and that again was very, very interesting, and was one of the first on campus to be in those societies and to be on the boards of those societies. But again, this was a wonderful opportunity for the university, wonderful opportunity for me, but a wonderful opportunity for the university to be recognized in this field. Subsequently, the American Dietetics Association requested that I apply for the editorship of their journal, and that was again very exciting because I knew that they were seeking a new editor, but to be asked to apply for it was again very exciting. So I did, and had an interview on the telephone. At that point, my husband and I were willing to move to Chicago if we needed to accept this editorship. But during the conference call, it was very clear to me that I would lose one of the main advantages I could offer the journal, which was this collaborative experience I had here at the University of Washington. I knew that I could go to Chicago and get a courtesy appointment at the University of Chicago or some major university in the area. That would not be a problem. But it would not give me the years of association that I had here at the University of Washington, where I could call the head of psychology or the head of medicine or the head of the various other organizations and find people who would be good reviewers or just talk out the topic of an article, because this was a peer-reviewed journal and they needed to have quality reviewers. So I told them I'd have to stay here. I could do a better job for the association, for the journal, if I stayed where I knew the turf. And they were willing, and it was the first time they ever had off-site editors, an off-site editor for the journal. And there is the journal that I edited for 20 years. Oops. These are some of the journals. You can see the different color spine for the different years. And I did that for 20 years. And when I retired from that, at the American Dietetic Association meeting they had that year in San Antonio, they made one of the days the Elaine Monsen Day, and that was to thank me for being editor for the journal for 20 years. And the Surgeon General, Dr. Camaro, came to speak at that session. And that was very exciting to have that kind of recognition. One of the people who wrote me a nice note at the end of that, a former president of the association, said, the journal was first rate when you took it over, but now it's world class, which was very nice. But this assemblage is quite fun. One place where I spoke, the people gave me a T-shirt. Well, I'm just not a T-shirt wearer. So I began hanging badges on it. You know, going to various meetings and putting the badges that you get afterwards on this T-shirt. Finally, that T-shirt got full, so I had to go out and buy myself a new one, an additional one, and pin them on there. And it's been kind of a fun way to keep them, because you can just throw them out, but it's more fun to have them saved some way. And this worked out. It gave me an excuse for the T-shirt without having to wear it. These are things I thought might be of interest. These are books that I have edited. One of the things I was very excited about was doing this research, Successful Approaches. This is the first edition, and this is the second edition, and I'm currently working on the third edition of this research book. And it's a book that chronicles ways of looking at research in the area of food, nutrition, and dietetics. And the third edition will be even stronger. And then this was one that Cheryl Rock and Ann Colster and I were editors of, Nutrition in the Prevention and Treatment of Disease. So these plus the journal are the main things I've been involved with, plus research articles and other publications.
Anything else in terms of the editorship that you could speak about? I mean, I know you've talked about it at a high level. Any more granular?
One thing I'm very pleased about with the editorship was that we developed strong relationships. They did not have a board of editors when I took over, and I felt that was would be wise to have. So you have a group of colleagues you can count on as the chief reviewers, as it were, for the journal, and that could give you input. So we developed a board of editors, and that's continued to this day. We also were very strict that research was called research. Things that were not research were called perspectives, because you need to have something that discusses research but may not be research itself, and not to have to slop it together, or not to have it muddled as one entity. I also started a structured abstract for the research articles, which I found to be handy because people could quickly grasp the essence of an article, so that there would be the purpose, the methods, the subjects, and so forth, in a structured abstract that began the article, for the research article, and then a non-structured abstract for the perspectives or the reviews. They still were there, but not structured, because they don't divide out the same kind of way. But I wanted this for ease of reading, for the major emphasis that readers could get from the articles. And I had wonderful support from an excellent people who helped me with the journal here at the university, particularly the Shaddocks. I had Rebecca Shattuck for 5 years, and then her sister Deborah Shattuck helped me for 15 years. And that was just a marvelous working relationship we had. And when people would ask me how long I'd stay, it seemed 20 years was a good length of time. But the one thing I wanted to be sure is that if the articles were not exciting for me to read, then it's time I left. But they always were. I'd get a bunch of new articles to take home, and it was just like popping popcorn, to take. And each one was a new kernel, and it was just fun. And as long as it felt that way, I thought I was still able to do a reasonably good job. And the one thing also I did want was to get out of here without anyone having a contract on my life, and that seemed to have, to have been accomplished as well. So I was very pleased about that.
I wonder if we might move off to that subject of where so many people expressed what a role model you were, and the role of women in how you saw it change. And I know you touched on it with the nepotism rule and the way that got relaxed and then changed. But could you talk a little bit more about
well,
that?
Yes. I mean, women have made dramatic advances since I've been around. that I don't mean because I've been around, but just in the times I've been observing. And it's very exciting for me to see that. But then that's kind of how I've lived my life, so it's hard for me to see. In many ways, there has been that much difference. But I've traveled a variety of places. The first time I was asked to give a paper down in Sao Paulo, Brazil, the only way I could get my way paid was to be out of the country, get the cheapest airfare, which meant I had to be out of the country 3 weeks. So what do? You make a wonderful trip. And I had a wonderful trip, went to Machu Picchu after the conference, and down to Lima, and then flew home. And it was a wonderful trip, a wonderful academic experience, a wonderful personal experience. And that's kind of how I've lived my life, is to take the advantages of what one has and work with that. But I have seen the role of women change dramatically over the years. And I really, when I'm in a group, I'm just a person. I don't think of myself as being a woman or a non-man. I remember one time going to a group of editors meeting, my journal, the Journal of Nutrition, the Journal of the American Society of Clinical Nutrition, and all of us sitting around a table, we were talking about different kinds of things. And at that point, I'd wanted them to do an article on ethics, so I ended up encouraging that, and I ended up having to write the article, which they then gave their opinions on, and we got it published. But the thing that amazed me was after this meeting, as I was driving to the airport, I realized I had been the only woman in the room, and it never crossed my mind. And usually, really, men and women are very quick to figure that out when they go into a space. If they're in the minority or the majority, or if they're the only one for certain.
It was only after the meeting.
It was only after the meeting. It dawned on me. But I think that was editors.
Yeah.
They are just not. They're not movie stars. They're very involved with with maybe a new article or something like that. I mean, just like I was when I would see the manuscripts. It was that manuscript that was so exciting, and if that's the case, then that's what you're dealing with, are those ideas. People were so helpful in Oh, for one thing, I could go to anybody on campus, and they would help you with your research. They would perhaps loan you equipment. It was very, very refreshing, and I just never had doors closed on me. Open some for other people, but mostly they were just there, and you could knock, and they where some of the universities I visited at, you'd knock on the door and you'd hear them running around. The door was locked. You'd hear them running around, putting their data away before they'd open the door to let you in. And that was never the case that I felt out here. People were very open. They enjoyed collaboration. The idea of multidisciplinary research or multidisciplinary grants were an accepted format. And that I thought was very, very helpful. And I hope it continues, and I hope it will.
Why don't you expand on that a little bit? Earlier you mentioned, and you've touched on this with the Nutritional Studies Committee, and before the camera was rolling, you mentioned how much more collaborative UW was than Stanford or Harvard or other places that you had experienced. Would you just
Sure.
riff on that a tad?
Well, I found the University of Washington to be very, very open, very collaborative. They're willing to do research. I could go to someone such as Dr. Bruce, who developed the whole stress test and exercise, and he would talk with me about that. And I was doing some exercise on animals, and you just had a very supportive environment here, where I did not find that other places. I did a postdoc, a National Science Foundation funded postdoc at Harvard, and was visiting scholar for a year at Stanford. And I didn't find as much collaborative and openness in other universities as I have here. As I say, I hope that still continues. It certainly was for me, and I find our new faculty members seem to be welcomed in other departments, so I assume it still is going forward that way. But whether it's collaborating with people in psychology or people in the Department or Center for Aging, there's just a very good relationships. And I found this certainly was beneficial for the journal, because then I could find excellent people to talk articles out with, and to maybe be reviewers for various articles. And I felt that we were more on the cutting edge of fields this way than we would have been if you had to discover everything yourself. This way there was just you already brought up a few leagues that way. So it was just very, very helpful to have such an excellent environment. And I found the same very, very welcoming relationships with Pat Wall, who has supported the nutrition area and the breadth of it quite actively.
Well, I wonder whether we could turn, at least briefly, from your professional life to your personal life.
One thing I would like to talk about at some point is teaching.
Oh.
Because I think teaching is extremely important.
Why don't we just start that one right here?
Okay. That's been another aspect that I've always had to be involved with here at the University of Washington, is teaching. And initially that would be teaching undergraduate students. Then it began teaching master's candidate students and guiding their research, which was very exciting. And then the doctoral students. And all of this has just been so valuable. The relationships one has with their students is invaluable, just invaluable. And one thing I'd like to mention, that might be of use to other people, but one exercise that I went through with any class, whether it would be a seminar for maybe 7 or 8 to a class for several hundred. And that was the second day of class. The first day the class was asked to do this. Second day they brought them in. And that was to prepare a sheet for me with 3 questions. One was they were to answer what they wanted to get out of that class. And the second that they were to answer was what their preparation, their background had been, their education, and so forth. And the third question was what they wanted to get out of life. And I would tell them if they hadn't thought about that question yet, it was high time they did. And so these students would share this with me. And this was really, in some ways, asking them quite a lot to do. And they did, and it was so interesting. It was a way of getting to know them. I'd read every single page even if it was a class of a couple of hundred, and make a few notes on it. Then the large classes I offered to them if they could want to sign up for a private session with me. But for the smaller classes, they were obligated to come see me. And I'd read this one more time before they came in. And then often there was things that came up that I could perhaps help them with. Maybe suggest that they get together with some faculty member or do something that would help them in their paths of interest. But I think that's something that other professors might, or people might find of interest to do.
What classes did you teach?
Beginning nutrition classes, advanced nutrition classes, clinical nutrition, even did some public health nutrition, aging. I didn't do any things with children. Had a child, but didn't do anything with the. But a lot of things on research.
And how did you get into nutrition as an interest?
Well, I was going to the University of Utah, actually. I was from California, but went to the University of Utah, and started out in pharmacy. And then I went home one summer, and my father, who was a surgeon and physician, said, "Are you sure that's what you really want to do?" And I began thinking about it and thought maybe he was right. So I looked through the catalog and I found nutrition, and it had so much science in it. I thought that would be interesting. So I shifted over to nutrition, and then after I graduated, I went back to Boston to the Massachusetts General Hospital and took a dietetic internship, which is a wonderful way of moving around through various areas of dietetics, from food service and food preparation to giving of foods in clinical situations. To the thing that I liked best was the experimental nutrition clinic, the thing they have down at the university hospital where they do research, and I was drawn to that from the very beginning. And they very graciously let me do my staff relief there in that particular section.
Dietetics?
Well, that's not the word I'm wanting. It's the thing that. It's the metabolic research unit, and they often include various dietary components that they're researching. And one of the things that we researched on initially there was on phenylketonuria and the very blonde children that appear with that disease, which is treated by giving them a very low phenylalanine diet. And it was just fascinating to be involved with research at that level. And as I say, I did my staff relief there, so I was geared when I came back to California and to go to graduate school and started a master's degree at the University of California at Berkeley. And then this wonderful man came along and said, would I marry him? And I said, well, may I go on for a doctorate? And he said, would you have to take the garbage out? And I said, no. And he said, okay. So, so I went in the next day to the school and said I was working on a doctorate. And they said, oh, we saw your picture in the paper. This is when you used to put your pictures in the paper when you were getting engaged. We saw your picture in the paper. We've already put you in the inactive file. And I said, oh, no, I'm going on for a doctorate. They said, okay. And they pulled the file out and put it into the doctorate file. I'd been taking, you could take biochemistry then, either for a master's or a doctorate. And for some reason, I'd taken it for the doctorate at the very beginning. I don't know why. But I had, so I didn't have to repeat that.
Oh.
But anyway, so then I went on for the doctorate, and it's just been a very, very exciting life.
Well, that might give us a segue to you speaking a little bit about the collaborative efforts of you and your husband. The Henry Art Gallery just closed, I think, just last month, the wonderful exhibit 75 at 75. Could you maybe talk about that exhibit as a lead-in to speaking a little bit about your personal interests? And could you finish by telling us about your daughter, who is both a scientist and an artist?
She's a filmmaker, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you could tell us a little bit about the personal passions and the collecting that went into creating 75 at 75, and then anything about your husband, your daughter, or the elements of your personal life apart from your professional life?
Well, of course, one's personal life is very deeply involved with one's professional life and vice versa, but I've had a very, very rewarding personal life with a marvelous husband. As I say, we've been married over 40 years now, quite a few over 40, 48 this coming January, and my daughter is 43, so we better be married that long. And she's a lovely, lovely, lovely young woman. But that's been a very exciting part of my life. My daughter was 3 months old when I started at the University of Washington to teach and do research here. My husband and I have been very active in the art field and also the music field. Joseph is a born collector. I tell him if he'd give me enough of his blood, I could find out what was wrong with him, because I know it's an enzymatic deficiency, but he's never given me a centimeter or a cubic millimeter. So I have not been able to figure out what the issue is, but we both tend to gravitate toward the same thing, but he is the one who would put together a collection, and I would just like to see it. I don't have to own it, but he has to own it and make the pieces fit together. The first collection we assembled was in Oriental art, particularly Japanese art, but eventually it just became too costly for academics to secure. And then we began a collection of contemporary American ceramics, which was shown in San Francisco and here in Seattle and Portland. And that was all contemporary ones. There were wonderful ceramicists here at this campus. Bob Sperry, Warashina, there's excellent people here, as well as throughout the country. And then we began, the year we were at Harvard, we started a collection of photographs. And initially the photographs were only American photographs, and then we expanded beyond that. And the exciting thing there is it goes from William Henry Fox Talbot, who developed photography back in 1838, 39, up to the contemporary day of 2006. So it has the whole breadth of photography, not great depth, because you can't collect great depth with great breadth at the same time, but it's cutting edge, and it has always been cutting edge, even the early ones. So it does go from the very early times to the contemporary. And we've given over about 1,000 photographs to the Henry Art Gallery, and was just recently shown there. And they called it 75 at 75, celebrating my husband's 75th year. And so from that 1,000, he selected 75 he was particularly, or thought would be appropriate to show. And there is a small catalog that was done from that show.
Why don't you show it and maybe pick any couple photographs.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you could just turn to a couple photographs.
Well, this is one of the earliest. This is William Henry Fox Talbot, who invented photography, and this is the bridge there in Cambridge.
Bridge of Sighs.
Well, it's the Bridge of Sighs. It's not Venice, though. This is in, yes.
Cambridge.
Yes,
Right.
Cambridge, England. And then there are quite a few contemporary ones. The most contemporary, though, this is a woman from here, Imogene Cunningham, who photographed her husband sitting on an ice cube in Mount Rainier. They did not stay married. And this is Cindy Sherman, who did this Judith holding the head of Holofernes. And actually, this is Cindy Sherman herself underneath there with a mask and covers over her feet, but those are her hands. And she usually photographs herself in her photographs. And others that are, they're also interesting. This is Lewis Carroll, who photographed under the name of Charles Ludwig Dodson. I mean, that was his real name, but he wrote his books under the name of Lewis Carroll. And this is the sister of Alice in Wonderland.
Oh, yeah, cool. And that's a famous one from Civil War, isn't it?
Yes, that's the bridge. That's Timothy O'Sullivan's.
Is that Gettysburg?
Gettysburg, called Harvest of Death. And he actually moved the bodies a little bit to get them in the order he wanted, which people didn't think anything. Things
time,
photography doesn't lie. Photography doesn't lie, but photographers may move things or change things, so it gets to be the. And this is one of our favorites. This Carlton Watkins that's used on the back.
Wow,
Columbia River Gorge.
Yes, before the dam.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, hold it straight. There we go. That's amazing.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. Stunning.
Then they did a very interesting show. This is Richard Prince, one of the more contemporary ones in the show. But because the ones that Henry has stop at about 94.3, they did another room upstairs called Up to Date, where they took 6 from the walls of our home that had ones that were done in 2005 and 2006. Katie Grannon and Ishimishimura Mura and Curlin, Laura Lertinsky, so forth. But the interesting photographs, they all have stories.
Yeah.
This one, I just love this story. Sugimoto does these very interesting things. In this particular one, he set the camera up in the theater, turned it on when the film started, turned it off when the film was over. And that's why where the film is, it looks so white because it's so exposed. But I keep thinking the whole film is there. If you could just, see it.
If you turn the page earlier, it shows a lake that
Oh yes,
Sid and I go by every year on our way to Burning Man.
Pyramid Lake.
Pyramid Lake.
Which one?
This one.
Pyramid Lake.
Oh, really?
Oh,
I guess, Sid doesn't notice it maybe.
I'm just sleeping.
he will this time.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Richard Mizrak. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Well,
Oh, and this is kind of fun. This is Ansel Adams,
I was about to say.
who did the Golden Gate, but this is the Golden Gate before the bridge.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of fun. Anyway, so that's fun, and I've also done quite a bit with music in the city. I was head of the Santa Fe Chamber Music Festival here for a couple of years, and also was very involved with the Seattle Foundation and was chair of that board for 2 years, and then past chair for 6 years, and chair-elect for about 6 years, and on the board for 9 or so. So it's been a busy, wonderful life.
well, please tell us a little bit about your daughter.
Well, the light of my life.
Oh, my.
She is a physician. She took her medical training here at the University of Washington, and then she did her specialty in emergency medicine. And she had made a film while she was in medical school as her senior project, and this was about rural health care, and she called it Where the Highway Ends because it was rural. And this was picked up by PBS and shown on PBS channel. And then she has subsequently did other ones, and I think that her experience in emergency medicine made her very aware of people having directives but not getting them, the staff being aware of them when the person came in. And so she wanted to delve a little bit more into that. And she did a couple of films, one for physicians called Grave Words, and another for all of us called The Vanishing Line. And this was selected by PBS for Point of View and was screened across the country. And very interesting. We had, when it was screened, we had friends from New York call at 9 in the evening, and then 10 people or the next hour people in Chicago, and next hour people in the mountain states, and then toward the very end of the evening, people from out here. But it was a very strong film, Where the Highway, Vanishing Line. So if you have a chance to see that, I think it's about death and dying, but it is so positive. You feel good at the end, which I think is a remarkable film. she's subsequently been working on things, particularly in communication between various people and physicians, and she's calling this Worlds Apart. And I think that's going to be screened sometime this year. I don't have a date for it. But she is at the Stanford in the Biomedical Ethics Center, and she's listed in the medical school there as with the Biomedical Ethics Center and as filmmaker in residence, which is a lovely...
Doesn't she choose amazingly evocative
Yes,
titles?
yes.
Every one of those titles
Yes.
rings home, and
Yes.
it seems to give a portent of the depth of the treatment. I mean, every one of those.
Yeah, she's quite remarkable.